I think what I wanted to do here was, and which I do with my teaching quite a bit, is to go over how you would proceed to model a head in clay, starting with very simple forms and proceeding from that. I've made a few small models here that you can see. They're kind of vague as they are right now, but they will, I'll show you the main shapes and then proceed on to a larger head where I can develop them. This is, although you could do it this way, but it's a little bit small. You can see the size of my hand. These are about 6 inches tall. So I also have a female figure over here, just kind of roughed out. The shapes are the same. So I think I even have a child over there, I'll show you in a bit. But the thing that, what I've come to in teaching is that there are universals about the figure, and you can teach those universals. And then the proportions are what makes us unique. And so learning what is universal about us it is a learnable thing. There's a lot of mystery in art, but it should not be how to model a nose or what are the big planes of the head. So that's what, and of course when I came along in the early 70s, late 60s, people, there wasn't kind of this stuff out there. It had all been kind of discarded for modernism. But anyway, I'm going to, without the big talk, I'm going to go over these and show them to you. So you have a couple big shapes here. You have the head, you have the neck, and then you have the upper torso, the thorax here. And they go into very simple shapes, and we'll talk about them. So everybody thinks about the head first. The head, you can think of it as round or an egg shape, and it has that quality. It's kind of wide at the top, and it gets narrower down here. You can also think of the skull going from front to back as an egg. But the problem with that analogy is that eggs don't have any corners, really. And so they're hard to define and hard to take further on. Heads, the things that you want to know in a very large sense about heads in the beginning is that they are taller than they are deep, and they are deeper than they are wide. So if you just thought of a bunch of mush up there that is taller this way than it is deep, and deeper than it is wide. So, you get, I don't know how many billion people are on the earth now, but they all fit that. They all fit that. So that's something that you can take, put in your head, and use for the rest of your life. It's a universal truth about human heads. So in a way, just leave it at that. You could have a formless piece of clay here that just had those proportions in the beginning. The neck, there's a lot of complexity in the neck, and especially with women, it's a really beautiful form, and it shows you about what the body's going to be to a great extent. But in the start, it's a very simple thing. You think of it as a cylinder like just a coffee can. It goes round, and it tilts forward. So if you think of it from the side, it is tilting forward. So if you get necks that go straight up and down, they look a little bit dead, kind of. And if people are like that, they're maybe not quite as alive. And you think of where you have a t-shirt collar. Shirts are kind of helpful when you think about shirts. Why is there a t-shirt collar there? because that's where the neck segues into the big plane of the front of the torso or the thorax. When you think down here, you are again thinking about shirts. There's one large plane here. Forget about the collarbone, all these little dimples, the manubrium, all that stuff. Forget about it. In the start, you're thinking up to the high point, which you can see, it's your contour. And then that's one plane, but it tilts back. Now the neck is tilting forward and that's tilting back. So chances are there's going to be a good bit of value change from here to here, because this is tilting more to the light, usually coming from above in a studio or most settings. The sun's up there, you know. So you have that. And let's finish that. These are very simple shapes that will develop. But you know what? Somebody said once that if you can't take everything you know and tell it to a 12-year-old in like a very simple paragraph, then you don't really understand it yourself. You have to be able to boil things down to their essence. What's their essence? So I teach anatomy all day long, and you get into very kind of complex forms and all that, but you have to be able to reduce it to a very simple shape, so that all art goes from larger ideas, and then they break down. It follows a kind of a form hierarchy. You don't start with small things and then add on to it. Shirts. So there's, on a dress shirt, a man's dress shirt, or even a t-shirt, there's a seam up here where you see the form turning over the hill, so to speak. There's a seam there, and it follows. It's in maybe the back third of the neck. It's not in the middle of the neck. It's set back a little bit, and so this comes up, and then it drifts over. It's not real sharp, but it turns over, and you're going to have another plane here facing about that way. Now, when you're drawing, you're thinking of that value, and that's what turns the plane. In sculpture, you're actually making the plane. So it's a little bit, you have a different skill set. But sculpture, and other artists will debate this, but I think I would say that sculpture is a real addition to anybody that is wanting to learn the figure. For every sculptor, there must be 10 painters and draftsmen. I think that it's not that sculpture's not as popular, but it's an incredible learning tool for two-dimensional artists. Now, so you have that seam on an Oxford shirt, and then you come into here, and we could talk about the anatomy and whatnot, but in this kind of thing, there are different ways to study. And anatomical study is one. Eckershey is the best of that, and we can talk about that at some point. But here, you're just thinking about the big planes and the big geometric shapes. So on a dress shirt, on an Oxford shirt, you have a seam up here, and then you have another seam down here, and it goes all the way across. You've all seen it, and it's mimicking the spine of the scapula. Again, anatomical term that you don't have to know here, but it's going to make that plane turn down more, like that. So the scapulas are here, and you have this form that kind of runs all the way across here, just like you would on a shirt. I think they call that this is the nape. I think this is called the yoke on a shirt. I'm not sure. And between these two things in here, you have the spine, and that will go into the spine and back out. I always put in center lines because they eventually go away, but it helps you to balance your forms. And human beings are bilaterally symmetrical. So whatever's over here is over here. You have an ear here, you have an ear here. And symmetry is a huge issue for artists. So anyway, there's a gazillion details in there, but forget them. Right now, you're thinking of the very largest kind of concepts you can. So you have that Oxford shirt seam. You have this. When you look down on it from above, it will make an M shape. It'll go this way, and then in, and then back out, and then in. So you have something along the lines of that. Again, the neck is tipping forward. It's a cylinder. It goes forward. And that's pretty much all you want to think about for a while. At a certain point, it's going to divide up, and I'll talk about that maybe in the larger piece, but I think we're going to move on to the head here. Another thing is, as this goes forward, it will very often come out at the root of the nose or the brow ridge up here, and will hit the cheekbone as it does. When we put those forms in, you very often see a continuity, kind of if you had a dotted line, seeing through space here. There's a phrase in sculpture where a form goes in, meaning where it goes in and disappears. Watch where it comes out, because same thing here on the back of the head, how the back of the head will conform to the front of the chest. So you can see it on the other side. The back of the head has a rhythmic conformity to the front of the chest. In sculpture or just in figure work in general, you can learn about the planes, you can learn about the geometry of it, you can learn all the anatomy of it, but these large shapes down to the small shapes have a rhythmic connection to them, and it's kind of like a heartbeat. If you're alive, your heart, you look on a heart meter and it has a rhythm to it like this, and it's rhythmical. It's a repeating rhythmic pattern. If your heartbeat goes off, it might be like this, and you're not feeling so good. You are literally not quite as alive as you would be if your heart was rhythmic. And of course, if you flatline, you're dead. And there is the one thing I can say about there's a lot of one things I can say about stuff, but about the rhythm of the figure, there is a material component to that heartbeat. Life is based on rhythm, and the forms are similar in that way. Okay, now we come to the head, but before I do, I wanted just to say one thing about the universal forms, as they call them. So the things that we're talking about, this is more of a male figure, and this is a female figure. Now I put a bun on her head, so she looks like a kind of a Greek goddess there. But the things that I'm talking about are universal. They're true about you and me and your brother and sister and mother and father and everybody else on the face of the earth. And I find that to be a kind of a nice idea, that we are all, despite what people may say, we are all the same. We're all built on the same parts, down to very small little things. Gender differences, sure, but even with that, most of those things tend to be, or a lot of those things tend to be what I'm going to talk about next, which is what makes you unique. So human beings are all completely. I don't want to say completely, but they're all basically the same in their patterning of the forms, and so that's what I can show you here, and in that way I'm making kind of generic heads. I'm not trying to make a individual personality here. That is the goal, but if you wanted to make a one in a very unique looking giraffe, you first have to learn about what makes a giraffe in general. So that's what we're doing here. So in terms of proportions, and you see male versus female, there are tendencies, and these are all things that you can learn. That's the thing about understanding things, is that there are artists where everything is based on your visual acuity and just drawing 8 hours a day, and which all of that is important, but it's not the only thing. And if you know what you're looking at, if you know what's going to happen in every human being, then you can be more particular in finding that particular person. So you get a human being easily. You want to get the difference between a male and a female, or you want to get the difference between ages, or even ethnicities. It's just kind of endless. And then you get down to that one in how many billion people are on the earth? I should know, but I don't. So that's what you're after. But in order to do that, it's kind of odd. You first have to know what is the constant, what is the universal. So just quickly, here you have a female head. It's kind of a caricature, but women tend to have longer necks. Their shoulders tend to not droop, but the angle of them goes down more because their collarbones, this is a generality, but their collarbones tend to go from horizontal to going slightly down, whereas men's collarbones tend to go from horizontal to up. So it just raises all the shoulder muscles, and the musculature in the shoulders is more so anyway. So there are those are proportional differences for the most part, and that is the one thing that makes you unique. So the patterning is the same. The proportions are what makes people, it's like fingerprints. We all have fingerprints, but the pattern of them is slightly different on some. So the proportions are what make you 1 in 6 billion or whatever it is. You can, the bones in the face, all the structures in the face are the same in men and women. The proportions will vary. They'll vary within men. I mean, if you were at a concert and you lost track of your friend or friends, and maybe there was 20,000 people at that concert or whatever it was, you could stand by the door and wait for them all to come out, and after about 5,000 walk by, then you'd see your friend and you'd know it. And that's proportions. So that's what makes for individual personality. Women have other tendencies. The jaw does not go as square on the end. They don't have the blocky chin that men have, and the angle of the jaw is different than on men. It's different this way. In other words, that angle, and it's also different on the side, what's called the angle of the jaw. It will be less. It'll be less of a 90-degree thing than will be on a man. The bone structure will be lighter. You'll get less kind of knobby forms. I'm kind of going off track here, talking about gender differences at this point. And you get less of the forms in the forehead, like the brow ridge form is less, Women's foreheads tend to go more toward the vertical and less sloping back like men. So there are all these things that you can know intellectually and bring to the game of your drawing or painting or modeling of a head. Okay, so in terms of the head, it's taller than it is deep, and it's deeper than it is wide. So in sculpture, you can actually measure that. You know, you could measure it with calipers. Although, as Michelangelo famously said, your calipers should be in your eyes. In other words, you shouldn't have those tools. I got one right here. These things should be using these all the time. You should be using your eyes. You develop your ability to measure with sighting techniques, as they call them. So it's taller than it is deep. It's deeper than it is wide. And then that large shape, whatever that is, will make a good bit of that personality. So if you kind of skimp over this step and go to the features, you will get something like your features on your best friend's head kind of thing. It doesn't work, or it won't be you. So a lot of the big shape in here, the thickness of the neck, tells you about what the body's going to be. All that stuff is characteristic in terms of important in terms of getting an individual likeness. But here, again, we're with the universal. So let's talk about that. So instead of thinking of the head as an egg, which you can, I think of it more like having a very positive front, side, back, bottom, two sides. So where do they divide? So and what are their planes? How do they what are their characteristics? If you think of the head, the center line running through the head, the top of the head's like a roof. It goes down like this. So you come to what's called the temporal ridge. And the temporal ridge is about in here. It's kind of like the gutters on a house. It's where the roof turns to the side. It'll do that. So that is definition. That will start to make this kind of blob thing become more characteristic of a human head. So it's kind of mimicking the contour of the top of the head, which we'll talk about. And it will come into here, which is where the forehead turns to the side. This is what we think of as the temple, and I think you all know what that is. That's that soft area in there. If you go there and you push in, it feels kind of tender or soft. But if you go, an inch this way, you're right on the frontal bone, which has a very thin muscle on it and will not, you can tap it and you'll feel bone right there. So that's the top. This will be the side. If you look at the jaw, as the jaw goes back, and remember we talked about rhythmic connections, and if you look at where the bottom of the skull is in here, the skull's going around, and you look at where it is here, it will flow down. If you follow that kind of current, it will flow down to the front of the chest. But if you actually look at the kind of straightish line of the bottom of the jaw, it's not perfectly straight, but it angles up. It's not going, horizontally. It's angling up. And if you follow that angle, it will lead you to the bottom of the skull in the back. There's a little bit of a drop off where the bottom of the skull is. and you'll see that. I'm showing you this in a kind of a step-by-step way. In other words, you don't start a head like this and put the nose on and start working on the eyes. It's just not the way it works. You can do that. Artists do it, but I think it's I don't want to insult anybody, but it's kind of illogical. Say you're looking for 510 Oak Street, and you start looking for, which is the detail. It's a smaller thing. There are a lot of 510 Oak Streets, but first you have to get onto the right continent. And so that's what we're doing. We're doing the larger things. So there's lots of things we haven't talked about, just like the movement of the head, but we'll let that go for just a sec. All right, so if you're looking at the jawline coming up, it will run into the head and turn up. This is called the angle of the jaw. And on men, it's not 90 degrees, but it's closer to 90 degrees. It's more open than 90 degrees, so I don't know what that would be. But with women, it's less. The angle is wider, so it's not as squarish here. And children are the same as women. That will run up basically into the kind of the middle of the head. And as it goes up, it's running slightly backwards. In other words, tilting back. Now, in front of that, on a horse, you get a big square muscle right in here. Big square. It's like 10 pounds of horse muscle. It's called the masseter muscle. It's because they sit around chewing grass all day long. It's got to be big. This is the muscle that closes your jaw, or one of them. And we're not going into musculature right now, but at the front of that muscle, the jaw makes a turn to the front. So there are basically 5 planes to a jaw. You have 1, 2, 3 for the chin, 4, 5 on the other side. And this front part of that masseter muscle coincides with the temple. That angle between terminology is important, and I often misuse it. It's not the temple. It's the border between the frontal bone and the temple. So, and this is the front of the masseter muscle. So, at that point, the jaw turns toward the front. So that is side, and where you go into shadow here, that's front. So I didn't plan that this would be in shadow and this would be in light, but it works out kind of nicely. Now let's talk. So you're keeping, these things are staying very kind of large, broad brush, as you would say. We'll go in a bit and develop a little bit more in the face. And I'm kind of, I'm teaching here, so I'm kind of focused on this side for the camera and whatnot. But in sculpture and with your two-dimensional work as well, you have to balance the sides. Otherwise, you'll work over here and you'll develop a really very nice eye. You work on it a long time. And then you come over and you work down in here, and then you come back up and you work on a very nice eye up here, but they're just like this. And so you have to, what's called balancing your forms. And in sculpture, you do it this way, and you also do it this way. You turn the thing back to see how this plane and this plane are working. In sculpture, you actually get down and look up at it. You're kind of on your knees looking up at it, and it's called saying your prayers, because if you work on a sculpture a long time and those big things don't balance, it's not good. So I'm trying to kind of work here for the camera, so it's a little bit awkward. There's another phrase. Phrases are interesting. My wife's father, who's a portrait painter, a very successful, a very good portrait painter, told it to me, and he said it's called side to side. I think he learned that from Riley. But side to side is where you just, when you look here, whatever it is, the ear, the eyebrow, the zygomatic ridge, whatever you're looking at there, quickly glance to the other side, because that quick, instantaneous comparison helps you to balance it. And you don't want to. I remember years of doing this side and then come over and do this side, and this side looked good, that side looked good, but they looked awful together because they looked like some kind of Picasso thing. Everything's off. So I will try diligently to insult everybody here, but you don't want Picasso heads in this anyway. Okay, so what do we know so far? It's taller. You know what they say in teaching, that you say everything you know in about 10 minutes and then you spend 40 years repeating it. It's not actually like that, but there's a lot of repeating because you want to make the point. And that's also kind of what the lines are about, to make it more obvious for you. You don't want, if I fudged that out and everything, you wouldn't know what, I haven't even told you about that thing yet, but if I fudged it out or fudged out and made it very subtle, it wouldn't maybe have the impact that it would otherwise. So you want things to have an impact, and that's why you maybe over-accentuate them or diagram them out a little bit. So it's taller than it is deep. It's deeper than it is wide. The neck goes up at an angle. It's a cylinder, just a cylinder that goes up. You have a front plane that goes to the seam on a t-shirt. You have the neck segues into the torso along a t-shirt collar. There's a lot of things going this way and that way, but you want to kind of squint, blur your eyes, and see the large shape because they all sit inside that. It's, I think geography is kind of a good analogy. It's like a map, and you may be looking for a city, but you first have to be on the right continent. You have to find the country, then the region, then the state, and then the region of the state. New York City's in the southeast of New York State, so that kind of thing. You have that seam that comes across here on a dress shirt. There'll be a little bit of a variation of it. It will go up that way when it gets to the medial border of the scapula. Again, we're not talking about anatomy here. There are different ways you can study, and this is not anatomical. This is geometric, planar, rhythmic. It's kind of the way you would model a head, but in slow motion, kind of. So we're kind of examining each step along the way. The only thing I would have done if I was modeling this from life, of course it would be bigger, would be to put the hair on in the beginning. So I did it kind of with the female head, but hair, I know sculptors that will make kind of bald figures, heads, and then put the hair on after. But it doesn't capture the look of that person, and hair, in any case, hair is dependent on what's underneath it, the skull. So the best idea of hair I've heard was from one of my former instructors. I've had so many. and he said, well, it's like a thick fluid, and it flows over this form of the skull, and so it's going to, unless you're one of those helmet people with hair like that, it's gonna show the planes of this underneath it. It kind of flows over like water flowing over a rock in a stream in Colorado or something. It conforms to it. And it has a very rhythmic quality to it. Anyway, this is too small to show that, so we won't. I remember studying my first class with a teacher that just taught me so much, Leslie Posey. He was a real old school academic sculptor, and he knew what the heck he was talking about. Anyway, he said to me, we're doing head, and we're doing it for one night, I think. And he said, all I want you to do is get the 8 planes in the forehead. So he was saying there are 8 planes in a forehead, this area. So the area, the planes go past that in a way, but it describes this. So the planes are 1, 2, then where the temples are, the side of the head, 3 and 4. And then in the forehead, you get a big plane in the middle that gets wider as it goes up. So that would be 5. This is the sinus. And if you see a skull, a real skull, sometimes I have one that's up at the school in Philadelphia right now. But if you take it's cut along here. If you take that off, you can see this area. The sinus is slightly hollow. I mean, it's hollow. It's a double hull here. It's like a wall and then an air pocket, another wall. And so that makes that area protrude out a little bit more. It's a little bit heavier. And that sinus is the air pocket. So when you get sinus headaches, you can, it's maybe in here or in your eye in that area, but those are sinuses. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this gets wider as it goes up. And here's the temporal ridge coming down. This area and the one in the other area will be 6 and 7, and they kind of slide into the head like that. They just kind of slide up there. This, however, so that's 7. We need one more. So men's skulls, this area tends to tip back more than on women. Women, it will go more toward the vertical. But in both of them, there's a little plane up here that always, not always, but very often catches a highlight. And it's right around where the hairline is. The hairline will very often kind of come into it like that. And you'll get a bright spot. All you have to do is go through Sargent portraits or something, and you'll see lots of drawings with a bright area up there, kind of a rectangle that runs long in that way. As this expands up here, that means these are going to get narrower on the side because there's only so much space there. The other thing, there's so many other things, but all these planes that you have, you see those planar heads, and they're quite good in ways because they show you kind of in a definitive way where this turns to that rather than having it a vague concept in your mind. But in another way, I find them lacking in that the planes are always perfectly flat, and it's what you want is something that makes the form more understandable, but not necessarily turn. You're taking it when you make them perfectly flat. You're taking you're taking organic human forms and turning them into a crystalline nature. So that doesn't quite jive. This eighth little plane up here, the way it differs from what is above it, it slides right into it. There's no gap there or anything like that. The only way this differs is that up here you have a crown. In other words, the planes come up to a plane change, whereas here the form goes right across that, and you don't get that kind of ridge or plane change coming like that, coming down into here. This is more going across like that. So it doesn't look too... The next thing we're going to do, we'll bring it kind of into the realm of more human, but I'm going to stop for a second here.